What's up, guys? It's Saturday. We're heading into the shop a little bit late. Had to take the puppy to the vet today. I've actually got him with me. He's coming into work. I'm actually driving the next big project for the channel. It's kind of going to be a little bit of a hint. Not going to show it quite yet. I should have a video coming out within the next week or so, kind of describing what it is and what I'm going to do with it. Couple little things going on at the shop today. We're getting the brake lines done on the Nova. Hopefully we get the whole car done. Also looking over, I got I think it's a 2012 CTSV at the shop. We put a cam and stuff in a few weeks ago for a buddy of ours, Will Dawson, that owns PD Tuning, one of his customers. Pretty basic setup, BTR stage 3. There's something either loose in the drivetrain or loose in the suspension that's rubbing, so we're still checking that out to make sure everything's good to go. I think it was like that before. Car's got a few miles on it. The steering shaft was pretty worn out, so it could be that as well. It's kind of like a rubbing while turning. Also have a Gen 5 LT truck coming in today just to check out. He's got a Whipple installed on it. It's been tuned for a while, but he's been having some issues. It is a Denali, so it has the 8-speed. I'm gonna go ahead and assume it's probably the 8-speed shuttering. It's really common. Again, he's got quite a few miles on the truck. He drives it a bunch, so we're gonna check that out for him. And then another Gen 5 LT truck with a small camshaft, and he's coming in for some transmission tuning. So we'll get going on that. Just made it to the shop. Let's get this dog to go potty. Come on, buddy. Guys, it's Monday. Saturday we got a whole bunch done on the Nova brake system. Pretty much laid out all of the brake lines. It had nothing in it. It had the front brake calipers, the master cylinder, the rear brake calipers, and that was it. So we built out all of the lines, tried to keep everything as neat and tidy as possible. Whole theme with this car, when it's finished, I want it to just be really nice and clean. I really don't want you to see a whole lot going on under the hood. We're going to do the same thing with the wiring, kind of try to hide everything under the intake through the firewall directly behind the motor, so when you open the hood it's nice and simple and clean. So he had already had installed a really nice Willwood manual brake setup on the car. The proportioning valve and these hard lines were pretty much the only thing that was in here. He had supplied us with a stainless steel brake line kit for the car, but it was like a classic Industries kit. These kits are more designed for a car that did have drum brakes and you kind of just did a disc brake conversion on it. Being that this car has a full front subframe, 9-inch in the rear, aftermarket racing brakes, aftermarket master cylinder, aftermarket proportioning valve, the stuff that came from Classic Industries really isn't going to be the best fit for this car. If I was going to have to cut and modify all these stainless lines, it made more sense for the customer to sell that kit for somebody that can use that kit directly out of the box. So for the front lines, this proportioning valve had 2 outlets to go to the fronts already. Obviously one was pretty easy. We just ran it straight down off the firewall under this frame rail. When I put the car up, I'll show you how we attached it underneath. And then for the passenger side, I really didn't want to run a line across the firewall back here where you were going to see it. I also didn't want to run it straight down and under the frame rails, under the car. Inside here, it's going to be nice and tucked up back there. There's not going to be a whole lot going on. He's not putting heat or AC back in the car. So it runs across the top and then back through another grommet there, and down the inside of the firewall up here to the bottom of the subframe as well. I'll put the car up in the air. We'll also give you a really good rundown of all of the good parts that he put on this car before bringing it to us. Also, the wastegates came from Jeremy at Elevated, so I'm going to go ahead and unbox those. Again, I absolutely love Jeremy at Elevated. I just make a call to him. Even though he's in Florida and I'm in Maryland, he gets me taken care of really quickly. I had these things overnight. Didn't have to pay for overnight shipping. I'm not saying that's what he always does, but he's just really good with parts. He is my go-to parts guy. Definitely worth buying stuff from him. He's super responsive. He'll get you what you need. He'll take care of you, give you the best price that he can give you. And then, you know, just having somebody to actually talk to and call versus like, if you don't know what you need or you know what you need and you try to get a hold of Summit and then have to go through their automated system, you have any problems, it's hard to get a hold of them, you got to deal with the return process and all that stuff. Just a lot easier to deal with somebody you know. But I'm going to go ahead and get these guys unboxed. I'll show you why I went with these on this car versus the other wastegates that I like to use. There's 2 different types that I like to use, but we'll show you what's really nice about these. So the reason why I went with these Turbo Smart wastegates on this setup instead of the piston style True North Turbo Black Sheep Industry wastegate is because I'm pretty limited on space. These are really nice and compact and they're extremely efficient for as small as they are. I do prefer to use a piston style wastegate, especially if we're going to run CO2. They just seal up a lot better. They tend to be a little bit more reliable. You don't have to worry about a diaphragm inside ripping. These gates came with a 14 PSI wastegate spring installed already inside of them. They also come with extra wastegate springs to change out. These are also really nice because they have a spanner style large threaded top on them. They come with a wrench to take these apart and change your springs out of. They're also completely stainless construction. They got a really nice large valve inside of them and a really deep throat. That's what she said. So even though this is a 45 millimeter wastegate, it is compact. It's a lot smaller than like a tile would be in the same size, and they're 44, but this thing's gonna outflow it big time. I just really like how compact these are. So we're still waiting on our wastegate merges from Motion. Today's a holiday. It is Martin Luther King Day, so I'm not gonna get anything in the mail or else they would have been here today. So these come with your weld flange, your clamp to hold it together, another weld flange for your dump tube and a clamp for that. And they also come with this seat. So if you've never built a turbo car before, a lot of people will forget to put this in here and they'll have boost issues. This seat is super important for this thing to seal. This winds up going right there, And when you install your flange and clamp, it all compresses together and basically makes this flush, and then it'll seal the bottom of your wastegate's valve to your flange, and everything will be sealed together. Without this guy in here, you're gonna have a very, very hard time making boost. So once we get our motion merges in the mail, I'm gonna be able to take these guys and get them mounted on the car. And then I'll show you how we plan out for priority on our wastegate merges. So when I say priority, what I mean is you want your wastegate to see as much exhaust as possible. You don't want to have bad wastegate priority, because if you do, you're going to have a really hard time controlling boost. And if you have a hard time controlling boost, that could be the difference of making an engine last for years and making an engine last for minutes. So what I'm going to wind up doing with these is we're going to probably run a 5 or 7 pound wastegate spring in them. I'm going to take a couple out. We're going to run on this car a 4-port boost controller. I've had really good luck with the Holley in a 4-port. A lot of guys will run CO2 and 2 3-port Mac valves. I'm not against using that setup, but for a guy that drives his car on the street 90% of the time, it's not a full-blown race car. He's not taking it to the track every week. It's not going to be a car that just needs to have basically be on kill at all points. So what we can do with the 4-port is if we run a 7-pound base pressure in our wastegate spring and we have good wastegate priority, basically anytime he's driving the car on the street, or if he wants to put pump gas in it, because we are going to have a true flex fuel setup on this car with the Holley, he can go to any gas station, put pump gas in it. The tune will automatically adjust for pump gas and it'll run wastegate pressure. My heater just came on. On pump gas, running around on 7 pounds, the car will be perfectly safe. He doesn't have to worry about opening or closing a CO2 bottle. He doesn't have to worry about changing the tune up just to run pump gas in the car, or plugging a laptop in or anything like that. And then when he goes to the track, basically run the car out of as much pump gas as possible, put pump E85 or Ignite Red or whatever he wants to in the car. The tune will automatically compensate for it. The boost will automatically compensate for it. And with that 4-port, I can make that 7-pound wastegate spring make 40 pounds of boost if I need it to. You can do the same thing with CO2. It is a little bit faster to react. You're not relying on the engine's boost pressure to also put pressure on top of the wastegate to hold it shut. But I've had plenty of, 3 or 4 7-second cars that have had just one 4-port boost controller on it with no issues. So just as a quick reference, this is a 3-port boost controller. So if you run a single 3-port boost controller by itself without CO2, this boost controller, wish it would focus, this boost controller will make about 2.5 times wastegate pressure if all of your settings are correct. The reason why I run a 4-port boost controller on these setups is because not only can you put boost pressure on the bottom of the gate and the top of the gate, you can also take away boost pressure and add that to the top of the gate. So I've had instances where a 7-pound wastegate spring will make 40 pounds of boost on less than 80% duty cycle, because your ability to move the boost around on the wastegate is a lot better than this 3-port. So by priority, what I mean is, let me grab my wastegate. So you want as much exhaust flow hitting the bottom of this valve as possible. So if I take this wastegate here and I put it right here, teed off of this pipe, obviously I wouldn't do that because it hangs real low. But when the exhaust is flowing this way through the pipe, if you put a wastegate here, the exhaust would basically have to make a 90-degree to go directly into the wastegate. So when the wastegate opens, the exhaust is going to want to follow the most natural path of flow. So it's still just going to go this way. There's going to be no pressure right here, so it's not going to want to make that 90-degree turn and then out of the wastegate. So what we normally do is, again, not saying this is where I'm going to put it, it wouldn't be a bad spot to put it, But we have this bend right here. And like I explained in the last video, if you keep fluid dynamics in mind, if the exhaust is traveling down this pipe and it hits this corner on this bend, it has to make a 90 degree and go up. So if I take my wastegate and I place it right here, the exhaust, when the wastegate's open, is gonna wanna go directly into that wastegate. So if I use this as my priority, and I run that exhaust flow directly into that wastegate, when this wastegate opens, it's gonna control how much exhaust is going into the turbo a lot better than if I were to put it teed off of this pipe. Same thing applies to this pipe. This would be optimal flow. This would be poor flow. And then the most poor would be to go this way. So as long as you keep those fluid dynamics in mind when you place your wastegates, it's just gonna be a lot more effective to put them in the direction of the exhaust flow. So we're running two 45 millimeter wastegates on this setup. I don't wanna have any issues with boost creep. I run this combination on a lot of these turbo LS builds, especially when the turbo kit is built like this, because we do have two separate primaries going into the bottom of the turbo. So if I can manage, I would like to get one of the wastegates somewhere off of this pipe up here. And then if room allows, I can either put the second one this direction and keep both of them pretty tight up there, or I can come off this way with one and then off of this bend with one, or one up here and one down here. I could use this side and have one over here and one over this pipe over here. It would be uniform to do them both that way. They would both face kind of the same direction. But then I also have to worry about plumbing to my wastegates for the boost source. And if they're really far away from each other, the source of the pressure might change a little bit from side to side. It might cause the boost to be a little bit more difficult to control, a little bit more sensitive with the boost controller. I just like to keep them close to each other. I can keep the wastegate dumps really close to each other, keep all of my lines shorter. I'm gonna have more response that way, and it's gonna be a lot easier to control the boost. So as soon as we get those wastegate merges in for motion, I'm gonna go ahead. What I like to do before I do anything is I like to get these flanges welded on to those merges before they get welded onto the car. There's a lot more space to do them here on the bench. And then I'll mock up on our turbo kit, you know, where they're gonna fit and work the best. And then we're gonna have to go ahead and cut, you know, the pipe out and weld those on. All right guys, so I got one of these welded up already. I'm gonna show you what I like to do before I weld them up. Straight out of the box, these motion merges are really nice, but this surface right here isn't necessarily always the flattest. So if I try to center this in my flange, trying to get it to where it's perfectly center and flat, doesn't really wanna go into place there. There is a receiving ring, like a groove in here that typically like an 1 3/4 pipe would fit into, or 2 inch. And this is just a little bit bigger. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put this on my belt sander. I'm gonna flatten this edge off first so I know that that's perfectly flat. And then I'm gonna bevel this edge. That way it sits inside of this groove a little bit better. Plus with this beveled edge here, it just gives me a little bit more room to put some filler in there and make the weld a little bit stronger. You can see where the belt sander had already started to flatten these two areas out. car surface is nice and flat, and I have a nice beveled edge to feed my weld into. So just to show you before I weld it, now with that beveled edge, there's no light gaps, and it sits down inside of that groove and centers itself up really nicely. Pretty much at a standstill again. Just ordered the intercooler for the car. Wound up ordering something from Treadstone, took some measurements up. Gonna fit it pretty nice in the grill. I did get this one motion merge welded on. I am waiting for the intercooler to come in because where this one winds up as far as clocking goes on this pipe, if I wind up too far towards the front and the back, I kind of mocked it up already, it'll get in the way of the intercooler, and I want to just make sure that there's ample space for that. So once that intercooler comes in, I'm going to get the intercooler mocked up in the car, figured out where I want it. That way I can get the wastegate on where I know it's going to fit. Other than that, it's coming out great. Brakes are done. Turbo kit 90% of the way wrapped up, minus the cold side stuff. Kind of excited to get this thing wrapped up as quick as possible. I got a bunch of other projects I want to start on. Keep an eye out for the new project for the shop. Going to be putting a video out within the next couple days on that. Got a couple other smaller things going on. A lot to me for the guys that are checking this stuff out. Something I wanted to do for a really long time. So remember, if you could like, subscribe, and comment on these videos, it would do me a huge favor. Help keep me motivated to keep putting this stuff out. But either way, guys, we'll see you on the next one.